Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. My name is Dan Wazalewski. I would like to introduce you to my Change Agent project as part of Stockton University's alternate route accreditation. The focus of this Change Agent project is really to become a conduit to an inclusive education environment in modern education, in 21st century education, and to instill values of universal design of learning into our daily classroom instruction. Um, the end goal of these institutional changes is to create a more fluid and more dynamic learning environment that accommodates for, but also caters to a wide array of student abilities and backgrounds, and kind of eliminates some of these exogenous factors that teachers oftentimes face within their classrooms. The core pillars of an inclusive classroom are kind of focused on this concept of UDL, the Universal Design for Learning. The three pillars here are outlined as you see. We'll dive into this research a bit more as we go through this, but just to give you a broad overview of it, it aims to allow individuality and choice for student learning, by extension, pursuit and ownership of their learning process and their knowledge, their end products, and then also multiple means to display content understanding, aside from what we commonly accept to be as formal assessment. Um, Today, I'd like to show you some of the steps I've taken in my daily classroom instruction to help further this push for UDL and to be a change agent for learners with whether it be socioeconomic backgrounds that are more challenging, or whether it be learning disabilities of a wide array of types, to really make sure that my classroom can be accommodating and accessible to people of all kinds, any backgrounds, any current situations, and still have an equal opportunity to be successful. So one of the foremost things I'd like to show you in terms of my UDL practices is kinesthetic activities. Um, Most of what we'll be talking about today is my senior economics class. What's unique about them is the fact that it is a senior class. It is electives with no prerequisites whatsoever. So I have, for a senior class of 550, I have the third ranked student in the class, and then I have a few who rank closer to that 550 number. So for this content, it's always interesting to try to make sure that we can all reach the common learning goal while at the same time challenging those who need the extra challenge and supporting those who might need additional supports. Kinesthetic activities are a great way to kick off classrooms. You'll see a few of them here that I've highlighted, but sometimes they're games, other times competitions, simulations, sometimes they're polling their classmates and conducting surveys, but it gets students up, it gets them active, talking, not so much about content, but real life things. So the one in the top right here, we see the fish market, and that was a buyers and sellers interaction, and the math factory was a competition of solving basic addition problems. So things that are not outside of anybody's reach, but at the same time do offer teaching points in a kinesthetic means. Um, in my classrooms, I always offer organizational supports, providing students with means to support themselves in terms of how to organize, structure, provide guidance. So guided notes, as you see here, three examples of them. You'll see on the top right-hand corner, we always have the content standards. So students have no issues looking up and seeing, okay, well, why are we learning this, or what is this all about? Always labeling things chronologically, having students write out their learning targets, very structured, organized, supportive network to help both obviously teachers, but more importantly, students to know what the end goal is, where we're trying to get there, and exactly how we plan to do it. Another type of inclusive practice that we've worked in is tiered assessments. This is where we begin to split hairs and really kind of tailor uniquely to student strengths and weaknesses. So you'll see on the screen right now, we have three different activities all focused on the same content, on the same learning targets. They aim to produce the same result, but get us there in different ways. So version A in the top right, this is what we would consider to be the lowest tier in terms of difficulty. You'll see hints are given. It's very structured, provides supports to help get students to where they're going while still having them work through the mental processes. The center one, version B, The hints are still there, but they're a bit more vague. They require more in-depth thought and consideration to get to the final output. And then ultimately in the bottom right-hand side, we do have version C. And version C is of the highest complexity. That is for, the top caliber learners who really get the information and are going for it, and really have the ability to challenge things to the next level. And this is a great way to show how you can have the same learning target but 3 different avenues to get there. An additional practice, and this is not so much on the formal assessment side of things, but we have self-assessment and reflection. You'll see here pictured of 3 of my disposition surveys I like to roll out in this class, and this gives students an opportunity to self-regulate but also self-reflect on their learning. It helps them to whether it be identify their shortcomings or identify their interests. As both the teacher and the student, it's always great to see where are the individuals at, what piques their interest, maybe what was glossed over, what needs to be retouched, and where do they stand, what they really walk away with. And I think these surveys are a great way to do it. Obviously, this can be rolled into, exit tickets, anonymous feedback, red light, yellow light, green light type exits. But for this, the ones you see pictured, this is more of a cumulative type thing. This is when we wrap up a unit or a longer period of study. And this is more of a broad, sweeping feedback form that allows students to kind of target maybe what their weak points were, what their stronger suits were, and where we can go from there, both as a team to really help this learning process. The heightened salience of goals is another thing that in modern education seems to be almost swept under the rug, or I'm not sure, educators seem to try to hide this from students when in fact it is common knowledge, it's public knowledge, and it should be used to help further the educational goals. So here we'll see these are some of the learning target sheets that I provide to my students, and on each sheet it shows the students exactly where we're going. You could think of it as an outline for the unit, or perhaps an organizational tool, but more so it shows, at the end of the day, maybe the lesson was or wasn't perfect, but they can look back at the sheet and they can see, okay, this is really the main idea, the key topic that we wanted to walk away with. And having that transparency as an educator really helps to drive home the main point of supporting students and building this environment where, I have nothing to hide from you. And at the same time, if you're ever lost or confused, I promise to do everything I can to help you. And I think that by showing the roadmap of exactly where we're trying to go, it's a great way to open up an inclusive classroom and make sure we're providing supports at all levels to various students. Of course, multimodal instruction. This is something that's a bit more common, but of course still necessary in the same way. These multimodal means of presenting information, you'll see here, this was on our lesson on price ceilings. In the top right, this is more data driven. Here's the graphs, here's the nuts and bolts of how it works. In the center area here, we have a black market for organs, which is in fact a price ceiling, but we show an interesting video about an unrelated topic to try to connect things visually for the auditory learners. And in the bottom, you'll see just more of a summary, an image, maybe that one thing that sticks in somebody's head, but as much as possible trying to present information in different media to address different learning styles, build on different strengths and weaknesses. And ultimately, where this really led us to, there's been so many examples of inclusive practices and UDL being integrated, but the chief focus of this actual project was to really isolate a single variable that would help to really further the classroom, to make the classroom, to bring it to the next stage of being inclusive and supporting students and practicing UDL on a regular basis. And for that, my focus generally was, how can I better incorporate differentiated assessments, but more so tiered assessments that are individually tailored to student needs. So for my Change Agent Focus project, I decided to go with the choice board assessment, which was something entirely new. I had never really built this into my classroom before, and I was intrigued to see how it would work out. So this choice board, you'll see it right here on the right-hand side, but we'll dive into it with greater detail coming up. But this is a procedure that just allows for individual choice. There's varied methods in terms of conducting research, summarizing findings, and then presenting information. what's great about this is that any given student can find something that is best suited for them. And I was hoping to see that this would work out that way, and my research was surprisingly positive, so I'm happy to show you about it. We had a pre-assessment just to see where students were on an incoming basis. The graph's here on the left-hand side, but I'll summarize it for you. Pre-assessment came back with an average and a median score, both at 6 out of 16 points. Comes out at about 38%, slightly below 40% on average. Specifically, there were questions incorporated that targeted higher order thinking, and there was a statistical significance that separated those incorrect responses versus baseline questions. So the goal was obviously to improve scores, but also help all learners achieve the higher order thinking questions and show deeper analytical thought and reasoning. So here's the project itself. As you'll see, there's various different ways you can approach it. So there's word clouds. They could find music that is simulated. They could draw something. They could do news research, legal research. We did have one pair do a skit, which I was thrilled about. That was very fun. And then, of course, a written summary for those who are cut and dry and just are purely informational at this level. Of course, we had to provide a rubric to make sure everyone was on the same page about expectations. So this outlined the criteria that were necessary for success with this. My reasoning as the educator behind this was to build in, terminology, definitions, the key targets I wanted students to walk away with. So I set that goal out there. And here's some examples. So here we have one on the left-hand side, a student who chose to compare our current topic of study of perfect market competition on global research. So he compared it to North Korea, which kids these days love talking about North Korea. So that was interesting. And he took it in the right direction. He addressed all the points. On the right-hand side, we have a student who compared our lesson on perfect competition to the Duck Song. I was not familiar with the Duck Song, but after a YouTube look, it was school appropriate, and it did in fact apply to what we were doing. So I was quite delighted with his or her choice right there. Several students took the visual spatial approach to it, having a mind map or a word cloud that kind of branched out and summarized these key points. And then, of course, some students, they're conditioned to the cut and dry, direct writing response, which I am as well, so I didn't want to omit that option. But several students took that as well, and here's some of their examples. After implementing the Change Agent project, as we see here from my Genesis outcrop up top, we see that post-assessment scores displayed an average of 90.1, which is a 52.6% increase in score, and median was right along there with it, a 50% increase in scores. So doubling back to what we said were really the higher order questions was the primary concern. There was no longer a statistical significance in inaccurate responses to the high order questions versus the baseline questions. So we did in fact close that gap by having students conduct research in their own avenues to reach the points of those higher questions. Following the Change Agent project, the Choice Board assessment, surveys indicated from students that there was actually a unanimous approval for the implementation of this new form of assessment. Students, their feedback, and it had cited the ability of having choice, of having multiple means to deliver their findings, and really that it wasn't direct instruction. A lot of them kind of liked that, hey, I could explore this on my own terms and find out more about it. So overall, it was quite successful. Very happy with it. My students were very happy with it. They were happy with their scores. And it was truly a win-win in terms of inclusion. Just to discuss quickly some of the research that goes into this, we talk here about self-advocacy, students taking ownership of their learning, on kinesthetic priming, the research proves the benefits of, being up, being active, using your mind to think about things that you don't even know yet. The benefits of choice here, statistical significance and learning above baseline in choice. And then the bottom two, of course, UDL and inclusion, which really is what we're driving home here, that diverse classrooms with different backgrounds are far more successful for all people involved than it is just for maybe the lower half or the top half. But inclusion truly is a demographic movement that's going to change how education is handled. And I'd be remiss if I didn't support these with a works cited, so I'll put that up here right now. As I run out of time, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate your consideration, and any further resources I'd be happy to supply.